This is the Architect Exam Podcast with architect Michael Rasica, the official podcast of the Young Architect Academy.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Architect Exam Podcast. I'm Michael Rasica. And a big question a lot of people are always asking about the Architect Exam is, what is the best sequence to take these 6 exams? Today, I want to give you the very best answer you've ever heard, because this question's aligned with one of my personal passions and something I actually care a lot about, which is architect exam strategy. And the reason why I care so much about this is because when I took my exams, guys, I had 0 exam strategy, and I painfully learned all the lessons the wrong way. And I later learned how if I would have just had a proper strategy, it could have saved me a lot of time, money, and energy. And a big part of why I think this podcast is so important today is because here we are many years later, and there's still a lot of really bad information surrounding this topic and this question. And at the end of this podcast, I'm going to address all the common bad advice that I've consistently seen being given to people at the beginning stages of their exams. So my goal with today's podcast is to not have you waste as much time, money, and energy as I did by screwing up this testing sequence question. But before we get started, I need to give a disclaimer, because whenever I on my soapbox and I give advice like this, the strategy that I'm going to share works for about 95% of people taking ARE 5.0. Whenever I do a podcast or I give out advice like this publicly, I always get approached by that one person who did actually the complete opposite, and it worked for them. And then they come at me saying, why are you telling people that? I did exactly the opposite of what you recommended, and it worked for me. Congratulations. I always go back to that story about that one guy that got in a car accident and he wasn't wearing a seatbelt and he didn't get hurt. Good for him. That's great. But you know what? As a coach and someone who's guided and pointed people in the right direction with the architect exam, I always like to play it safe. And the strategy I'm about to share with you, it's the same strategy we use in our boot camp. It's the same strategy people have been using forever. I know there are people that use other strategies and it works for them, but let me tell you what 95% of people are doing when it comes to sequencing ARE 5.0. I'm going to give you the answer to the question, what's the best testing order? And then we're going to use the rest of this podcast to explain why this strategy works. All right, so first up, let's zoom out. Let's go big picture first. With ARE 5.0, there are 6 exams. These 6 exams are broken really into 2 phases. There's pro-practice exams and technical exams, and I'm going to break this down in a second. But when you're first getting started, the strategy is to take your pro-practice exams first. Those 3 exams are called practice management, project management, construction, and evaluation. Study and pass and complete these 3 exams before you move on. The sequence and order and how you take these 3 exams does not really matter. So practice management, project management, construction, evaluation. Get these 3 tests done first. I would not recommend moving on to any of the remaining exams until you've passed the 3 pro practice, and I'll explain why in a second. All right, then after you've completed your pro practice exams, move on to the first technical exams. It's called programming and analysis. This is your next test. And here's the strategy with PA. I would study really hard and take it once. If you pass PA, great job. And if not, make it your last exam. Because after you take PA once, you'll move on to the next 2 tests, PPD and PDD. That's project planning and design, project development and documentation. These 2 tests work hand in hand with each other. They're monster exams, and there's a lot of information to unpack here. And then as a last test, if you have to retake PA, make it your last exam. And so that's the complete sequence that people are using. And next, I'll explain why this sequence and strategy behind it in a second. Before we dive into why this strategy works, let me give you a quick reality check with the scope and size of the project we're dealing with. I've talked about this on other podcasts, and I'm just going to bring it up again real quick. Guys, currently, we're measuring that it's taking people between 700 and 1,500 hours of studying and taking tests, retaking tests, and doing the work to pass all these exams. I'm sharing these numbers because sometimes people asking the question about testing order, they don't properly understand the scope of this project and the fact that it's a 700 to 1,500 hours we're talking about here to pass these exams. This isn't something people just knock out in a few weekends. And I actually have the real data to prove it. I have thousands of spreadsheets going back to 2015 containing how much time our students spent studying for their exams. And the reason I have this is because tracking how much time we studied is a big part of our ARE bootcamp program. So this isn't just a guess. It's based on actual experience with hundreds and hundreds of people over the past 10 years. And so now that we understand the scope of what we're dealing with, let's get into why that sequence I just shared with you is the best approach for 95% of people taking the architect exam. And to understand the strategy, we need to get back to the 6 exams and breaking it down into the 2 distinct phases. Because once you understand these phases, the testing order starts to make a lot more sense. All right, so let me explain this in simple terms. As I mentioned earlier, we have pro practice exams and technical exams. And understanding what makes up these 2 phases, it's really key to understanding the strategy and how to study efficiently. So I think the best way to understand this is to actually do it backwards and talk about the technical phase first. There's 3 technical exams. It breaks down to PA, PPD, and PDD. Now, these technical exams make up everything that goes into an actual building. We're talking about the tangible stuff here. We're talking about designing the building, the site analysis, the soils report, structures, accessibility, codes, the materials, methods, assemblies, the detailing, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems, construction specifications. Is it going to be a wood building versus a concrete building or a steel building? Basically, it's the architecture. It's the building design elements. These are the topics that make up those technical exams. And I mentioned we're doing this backwards. So now to pro practice is actually the opposite of what we just talked about. Think of the pro practice exams as more of like the administrative exams. It consists of all the administrative tasks that take place during a project. We're talking about starting and running your architecture firm, properly managing the financial data, making sure that your firm's profitable, making money, everything around project management and keeping the project on track with schedules, budgets, bidding, bonds. And there's also clients, contractors, consultants, contracts. Properly understanding how to do construction administration is a really huge part of these exams. And we're talking about RFIs and ASIs and CCDs and change orders and closing out the project. So think of these pro practice exams almost like the soft skills or the soft costs of designing construction projects. You can't physically touch these things, but properly understanding these topics and concepts will decide if your project's sink or swim. So after zooming out and kind of seeing the bigger picture, here's a key point I'm trying to emphasize is that while there's a lot of overlapping information between all ARE exams, when you see the bigger picture, they break down into these 2 different types of tests. And understanding this breakdown is exactly why the testing sequence I just shared works so well.
You're listening to the Architect Exam Podcast, your guide to passing the ARE.
Hey guys, I hope you're finding this podcast regarding the ARE exam order helpful. I put together a free 2-page set of study notes, so just visit youngarchitect.com/exam order, and you'll see on that webpage where you can download your free set of notes. So let's talk about the pro practice strategy, and let's talk about why you absolutely need to take the pro practice exams first. First, I'd say that PCM, PJM, CE are perfect beginner tests. They're perfect to beginning your 700 and 1500 hour journey for the ARE exam. They're smaller exams. They're more manageable. The study materials are succinct and easy to use. The objectives are easy to break down. And the sequence of these 3 exams doesn't really matter. Guys, I've heard every argument through the years about why you should take, PCM before PJM or CE before PJM. And here's the bottom line. What's most important is that you just complete these first 3 exams before you move on to your technical exams. Each one of these tests has their own personality, and I don't think one of them is actually easier or harder than another. It kind of boils down to you. What's your experience and what's your level on these different topics? But here's why these first 3 tests should be done first. And probably the most important thing is the topics that make up practice management, project management, construction evaluation are all about how an owner, an architect, and a contractor work together. And if you don't know that topic inside and out, backwards and forwards, left and right, you're wasting your time studying mechanical systems or structures or building materials, codes, acoustics, or any of that other stuff. Every single exam is going to test your knowledge on the basics of how an owner, an architect, and a contractor all work together. And this foundational knowledge shows up across every architect exam, not just the pro practice exams. I mean, this is also a big part of why the architect exam exists. And I always tell my boot campers that if you don't understand this concept, you're going to be dead before you even think about which mechanical system to use. And so this is why we need to nail down the professional practice as a foundation before you start moving into the technical exams. So now that you understand why pro practice comes first, let's talk about what happens next in the technical phase, and probably the biggest mistake most people make. So after people pass the pro practice exams, they're feeling good. And why wouldn't they? They just passed 3 really hard tests that all built off of each other and all addressed very similar topics, but from a very different perspective. PCM, PJM, CE, once you get the hang of it, it's really not that difficult. So people are feeling good. And then they dive into the PA exam thinking that they'll just keep building off of what they've already learned. When in reality, that's not really the case. When you get to PA, you're kind of starting all over again. Because the technical exams, well, yes, that concept of owner, architect, and contractor work together is going to come up on every exams. They really don't have a lot in common with the PCM, PJM, and CE exams. And this is why I tell everyone, do not rush studying for the programming and analysis. PA is all about the pre-design, the early design stages, the foundation for everything that you're going to do in PPD and PDD. It goes over budget, site, codes, accessibility, programming. PA content, I don't have my calculator in front of me, but if I was to guess, it probably overlaps about 25% of the PPD content. Now think of PA as a beautiful warm-up for PPD and PDD, which are the monster tests I talked about earlier. PPD and PDD have almost a 100% overlap between the two of them. So what you learn from properly studying for PA actually sets you up for success when you get to the more advanced concepts of PPD and PDD. So my key insight that you should consider is that you don't have to pass PA. I wish you would. I want you to pass PA. But if you don't, what's probably more important is that you properly studied for it. If you don't properly study hard for PA and you don't pass it, you're really going to struggle more with PPD and PDD because they just build off of what PA's knowledge base was. All right, so here's the strategy. Study really hard for PA. Hopefully you pass it. If not, go finish PPD and PDD and stay there. And if you didn't pass PA, just come back to it as your very last exam. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, PPD and PDD, these are the monster tests. And honestly, PPD and PDD strategy is a whole other podcast that I could talk about all day, every day. But today we're talking about testing order, not PPD and PDD strategy. So the bottom line is this sequence works because PA gives you that foundation you need for the advanced technical content in PPD and PDD. And that's the strategy. And that's the sequence I recommend and why it works for 95% of people studying for the architect exams. When you have good strategy, it saves you a lot of wasted effort in the long run. And this strategy has worked for thousands of people I've coached over the years with ARE Bootcamp. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, let's address a lot of the bad advice that people give when it comes to the best ARE testing sequence. And to do this, I've written them all down. I was thinking about firing up my NCARB music. Where is that stuff? Yeah. All right, so the first one that I've seen a lot of people give is study for all 6 exams at once and then take them all at the same time. All right, so this is probably the very worst architect exam strategy advice I've ever heard. And it's been around for as long as I've been a part of this community. And quite honestly, I'm surprised it's still around. The idea of studying for all 6 exams simultaneously, and maybe you'll get lucky and pass one, ooh. This is a strategy I'm very passionate about speaking out against because this approach has been repeatedly proven over and over again as a failed strategy, and more importantly, as a terrible strategy. And the people who are repeatedly giving this advice are giving it with the wrong intentions. And here's why it doesn't work. The human brain can't handle the amount of details required to successfully pass 6 of these exams all at the same time. And when you try to study for 6 exams all at once, it actually dilutes the entire study process. It's like trying to cook 6 different meals all at the same time. You're going to burn something, but with the ARE, it's probably going to be your brain. Imagine just trying to master these 200 different concepts we need to know. You're going to end up getting very little value and don't really learn anything along the way. Failing 6 exams at the very beginning, in my opinion, is a terrible way to get started on this process. And sadly, the people I see pushing this approach are often the people who sell ARE prep study materials to people who are uninformed or in the beginning stages of their exams. They use this get-rich-quick ARE strategy as a way to sell their products. But here's what really bothers me about this approach is I cringe with the maybe you get lucky or the let's hack the architect exam approach or mentality. Guys, studying for the architect registration exam isn't about gaming a test. It's about protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the public. Completing the architect exam is going to be the most important project that you ever work on in your entire career. And I say that because the return on your investment of getting your architecture license is going to be so much bigger than any project, client, star architect, or firm. So hoping you get lucky isn't a strategy. Studying with intention and making sure you pass these exams is. And I get it. I get it. We're all busy. But if the goal is to quickly and efficiently pass your exams, I want you to know that do them one at a time. You will pass them faster and make better progress, but more importantly, get the education to become an amazing architect. I always remind people that the education I got studying for my architect exams was actually way more valuable than actually getting the architectural license. Even before I got my architecture license, what I learned studying for my architect exams helped me get a better job, helped me make more money, helped me be successful. And by the time I had that architecture license, as soon as I got it, I immediately started stamping drawings. All right, let's fire up the music here. The second most common advice is take the hardest test first or just take the easiest test first. I don't think this is a good approach. More importantly, I would say a better strategy is to take the pro practice exams first and then follow the strategy I shared for moving through the technical exams. That's a better way to think about it, and it will actually set you up for success a lot better. Another strategy I hear is just take the PA exam as a first exam. I see this a lot. This is very common advice. And I think it's because when you look really closely at NCARB's guidelines, I think on the surface, PA looks to be like the friendliest or the least intimidating exam. But in my opinion, I actually think PA might be probably the hardest test to pass and study for. And so that's why I recommend pass your pro practice exams first. What you learn studying for those first 3 exams will give you the skills and you'll very quickly start to figure out what you need to do for PA, but I wouldn't get stuck there. Don't take PA as a first exam. Another big PA mistake people make is they just keep failing PA over and over and over again without moving on. Getting back to my strategy is you don't have to do that. Take it once, get the education, get the knowledge, move on to PPD and PDD. Passing PPD and PDD will help you go back for PA. All right, another piece of advice I hear is, there's a lot of overlap between the 3 pro practice exams, so just study for all 3 and take them all at the same time. So yeah, I agree. There's a lot of overlap between these 3 exams. And I actually, in my other presentations, we're talking about sequence and strategy. I don't want to go off the deep end, but I would recommend understanding the scope and what the differences are between these first 3 exams and nail down a lot of those overlapping topics, like B101 and A201 and project delivery methods and, understanding some of the fundamentals between the 3. But then, and this is the strategy we actually use in the boot camp, is we zoom out, we nail down kind of the bigger picture foundational stuff, and then we pick one of these exams and zoom into the details of it. There's a lot of details that make up these 3 exams. PCM, it's the financial stuff. PGM, it's the codes. And CE, it's the construction administration. It's the A201. And allowing yourself the space to really get into the nitty-gritty details of what makes up that test, it's a lot. Back to what I said earlier, the human brain can't handle all this information. And if the goal is to do this quickly and efficiently and not fail exams, I want you to know that, see the big picture first, but then pick a test and do them one at a time and get into the details and be thorough and diligent. And yes, what's kind of cool too about PCM, PGM, CE is they all build off of each other. So whichever one you take first and study for first, it's probably going to be the heaviest, the hardest one, but then the other 2 are going to come a lot easier.
You're listening to the Architect Exam Podcast, the official podcast of the Young Architect Academy.
Hey guys, I hope you're finding this podcast regarding the ARE exam order helpful. I put together a free 2-page set of study notes, so just visit youngarchitect.com/exam order, and you'll see on that webpage where you can download your free set of notes. All right, I got 2 more, and then let's wrap this thing up. All right, the next one, it's not really about testing order, but it's more about schedule, but it's the advice of just schedule all your exams up front. Now, this is the one that really gets under my skin. And I hate this advice because there's no benefit to this. Arbitrarily choosing test dates in the future and forcing yourself into them, there's no discount, there's no benefit, there's no tent punch card like the coffee shop. All this does is it creates a lot of stress. It's a lot easier to project and look 4 or 5 weeks into the future than it is to understand what 10, 12, or 20 weeks looks like in the future. So my advice is you got a lot of work to do. Start doing the work and making progress. And when you feel like you're maybe about halfway there, look at what's going on in your life and make a good, educated decision on when you should choose a test date. I have another podcast about a study schedule. And just a reminder of what I emphasize, it's actually your personal life is going to be what dictates your ARE schedule more than anything else going on. Are you moving? Are you having a baby? Are you going through a breakup? How busy is the office? That actually dictates the schedule of how long it's going to take you with these exams. All right, and the very last one I've heard people say about testing order is just follow NCARB's sequence. All right, let's talk about NCARB's recommended sequence. I'm actually not against it, but the one element I don't like is I don't like putting CE at the end of the testing process, like the NCARB sequence suggests. CE takes a lot of work. It's a lot of AI contracts and A201, and there's a lot of time and space that goes on with PA, PPD, and PDD. So in the name of efficiency, having to go back and get your brain back into the AI contracts and the A201, it's not the most efficient way to do things. And so I don't recommend that. And, since you already studied for the B101 and A201 with the other pro practice exams, I'd say strike while the iron is hot. Just do it while that knowledge is fresh in your brain. All right, so let's wrap up this podcast. I want to keep this short. So I've always been really passionate about the architect exam strategy because it's something I wish I had and I had to figure out the hard way. And so if we could just work more efficiently, it really makes things a lot easier for you. And that's what this entire podcast has been about. It's giving you the strategic approach that actually works. It's organizing these exams into a logical sequence, not just maybe you'll get lucky kind of strategy. So if you found this podcast helpful, I'd like to invite you to come study with us at the Young Architect Academy. So for the architect exam, we've created 2 main programs for people to choose from that are very different from each other. And we did this because I truly believe, not everyone needs the same level of help and support as the next person. We're human beings. We're not machines or architecture robots. So our first option is called our ARE 5.0 101 course membership. These are our courses. It's more of a DIY approach. We're basically giving you videos that talk about how to break down NCARB's objectives. We've written hundreds of practice questions. It's content for you to go through at your own pace and dive into. And it's really a membership of study materials to kind of help get you started. One of the underlying principles of all of our products, it's to help you better understand how to teach this to yourself. And so we've got, at the time of recording this, like over 80 to 100 hours of video content for the architect exam, but it's a supplement and it's a starting point to help you better understand how to prepare for this thing. So we offer this high value product at a pretty low price when you compare it to a lot of our competitors and other ARE resources. And our second product, which is our more premium product, is called our ARE Bootcamp. This is not a DIY study materials program. It's more of like a class or a course. I always say it's a program. It's the only program for the architect exam. Because rather than trying to figure out what to study, what to use, what book, and what's important, what's not important, the bootcamp actually does this. And we break it down into small, weekly, bite-sized pieces. And it allows people to actually use their time to study and make progress rather than worrying or trying to figure out how to curate or put all this information together. The bootcamp meets weekly, and I give everyone a list of work of what needs to happen each week. Then the bootcampers actually study with each other in between those weekly meetings, and there's a community of people breaking down practice questions, talking on Zoom, explaining it to each other, learning from each other. I always say it's a lot like architecture school. We have a really strong curriculum. Curriculum is a big part of the program because I've learned that if we can teach you steps 1, 2, and 3, learning steps 4, 5, and 6 just goes so much easier. And a lot of people who study on their own immediately start with like step 5 and question why they're confused. So Bootcamp's been a powerhouse with helping a lot of very busy people make fast progress and get their architecture license. So I'd like to invite you to come join us at the Young Architect Academy and let's get you licensed. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Architect Exam Podcast. Ready to take your studying to the next level? Visit our online ARE Architecture School website at academy.youngarchitect.com to learn more about how we can help you. See you next time.